Hey everybody, welcome back to InnoIso, and welcome to the Apple Vision Pro review series. In part 1, we proposed the question, what was Apple thinking, as we attempted to dissect the decision-making process and positioning of the Apple Vision Pro to better understand the point of the device, as well as who was and what it was for. If you didn't watch it, you should check it out here. I'll wait. Today we're going to dig a bit deeper into how the Apple Vision Pro functions and cover more traditional review topics like its design, its hardware, its software, and its features. But before we begin, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more detailed tech reviews and coverage, and like the series. Alright, let's dive in. The Apple Vision Pro is undoubtedly the highest quality mixed reality headset that I've ever used in terms of design, which is to be expected considering the price. Between the glass front panel and the aluminum frame, it feels incredibly premium. All of the buttons have this incredibly tactile action. I'm less impressed though by the kind of floppy rubber arms which make up the fixed part of the headband, which have the same sort of surface feeling as the AirPods Pro Max headband and the Apple Watch Sport Band. I haven't experienced any discoloration on it quite yet, but that might possibly happen in the future just based off of this material. Now, what has already happened is some wear on the eye shield and the solo knit band. There's little strands that have started to kind of fray from it, which is crazy to think in such a short time frame. Now, fans of my channel know that I'm more concerned with the ergonomics of a product rather than the visual design. And the ergonomics of the Apple Vision Pro leave a lot to be desired. For one, the external battery has just a way of getting caught on things when I'm walking around the house, or I'll snag against it or, have it fall on my shoulder uncomfortably when I'm just sitting on the couch just trying to watch a movie. Now, considering how heavy the device is even without the battery, it's not the most comfortable headset that I've worn, but it's not really made for kind of longer watch sessions in my experience. The solo knit band feels like a complete miss. It kind of squeezes the headset against your face and it leaves red marks and kind of like a raccoon around your eyes. Now, the dual loop band, on the other hand, feels like the better option overall. Now, speaking of the general experience, let's talk about the user experience of the Apple Vision Pro. There are only two physical buttons or controls on the device, the digital crown and the other button. What does the other button do? It captures photos or videos, I guess. Why? Did Apple really think the average person would be capturing photos with this device when a better camera is just sitting in their pocket? It feels like a complete waste of a button. Now, maybe in the future, it becomes a custom action button-like solution like you have in the iPhone 15 Pro. I didn't really naturally want to press it quite often, and so it felt kind of useless. And then there's the digital crown. And I hate the digital crown. But before we ask why, let's have a quick education session. Let's talk about digital and analog signals. A digital signal is basically on or off. It's either 1 or 0, the same way that computers often process information and the way that most sort of light switches around your room will typically work. It's pretty straightforward. And an analog signal, on the other hand, is a little bit different in that an analog signal doesn't need to be on or off. It could be anything in between completely on or completely off. It's contiguous. And these are very, very important distinctions because different interactions with different operating systems or different devices, very importantly, will function in different ways. For example, if you happen to have a light switch that is one of those turning light switches, but all that's happening is the light is turning on or off, it feels like a bad experience. And vice versa. If you have a light that has the ability to have varying levels of brightness, and all you have is a switch, then you are losing the entire benefit of having the varying levels of brightness. You can either go on and off. Now, maybe you see where I'm going. If you're confused to why the digital crown is called digital, despite being analog, that's a great question. It's because Apple sucks at naming. Now, what does this have to do with the actual experience of using the Apple Vision Pro? Well, the core function of the digital crown on the Apple Vision Pro is to control how immersive your environment is. You know the commercials where they show the living room just vanishing around the user? That's the digital crown in action. But my question is, Why is this an analog control? Do you really need such precision that only this 37.8% of your living room is the moon and the other 62.2% is just your living room? I honestly believe that the core use case of this analog control is just to look fancy in advertisements and marketing. But Conrad, you might say, you can control more than just the immersion, you can also control the volume with it. But how do you actually do that? How do you control the volume on using the dial? Well, first you've got to spin the dial slightly. Then you have to look specifically and focus on the volume menu, and then you can continue to spin it to your desired level. At best, this takes a bit of a learning curve, and at worst, I just use the control center instead. But we're not done ragging on the digital crown. It is the primary way to navigate the operating system. A single press takes you home, a double press closes all apps and takes you to a completely blank environment, and a press and hold recenters all of your apps in front of you. But why? This feels like a step back in time to 2016 when the iPhone had a physical home button instead of gesture controls. With Apple pushing the boundaries of what is possible with eye tracking and hand gestures, a physical button on top of the device just kind of confuses me. There's something to be said about just how effortless a swipe up on the home screen is, to the point where going back to the iPhone 8 or the iPhone SE feels like a regression to me. So why Apple made a physical button press the core interaction method of how you navigate the operating system bewilders me. And that physical button sits on top of your face. You're reaching up and physically pressing the headset down away from your eyes in order to interact with the system. It's just bizarre. Now, as for the face shield, this too highlights a significant room for actual user improvement. Now, besides the strange ordering process requiring you to scan your face using an iPhone, the face shield made using this device kind of unnecessarily isolating in my experience. In the bit of time I've used the Apple Vision Pro without the face shield attached, I actually enjoyed the experience much more. Being able to view my peripheral around the Apple Vision Pro made it almost feel like wearing true AR glasses. There's no real off-the-shelf way to do this. There's several third parties that are making new bands and new face shields that will allow you to more easily use it in this manner, but there's nothing available from Apple to allow you to do so. And that face shield, as you saw, is completely magnetically attached. While this is cool, if you pick up the device by the face shield, you risk the face shield dropping off and the entire Apple Vision Pro dropping to the floor. This is so much of a thing that in all of the demos, when you sit down and you order your Apple Vision Pro and you walk into the store and you get to use it, when they walk you through using the product, they specifically tell you, do not grasp the Apple Vision Pro from the face shield. You should very specifically lift your finger under this and then grab the band, which it seems to be silly. I mean, it seems to be like you should be able to grab the headset however you want to grab it in order to put it on, but it feels very, very delicate whenever you do so. Okay, now that I've gotten my ranting on the design idiosyncrasies out of the way, let's talk about where the Apple Vision Pro really starts to excel in the displays. Now, boasting 4K display per eye, VR content is just incredibly crisp. Even it's indistinguishable from me using a 4K monitor pretty close to my face. Reading text is an excellent experience, and watching movies or TV shows in the Vision Pro is just about as good as it gets. Unless, of course, you enjoy company. Still, there are some limitations I've found. In dark environments, reflections and lens flares that show up when viewing content in kind of the immersive mode, so everything around you is dark, you've got a screen in front of you, you see the kind of lens flares and light bounce off the lens, and that's very, very distracting for me. In addition, around the edges of the lens, I can actually see discoloration, this green, purple, almost like filter, which is the distortion of the lens happening. And I haven't heard this from everyone. Only a few people have experienced this, and I don't know whether that's where my eyes naturally sit relative to the lenses or my unit in particular. And generally, while we typically desire brighter displays on all of our mobile devices like phones, I actually felt the opposite when I was trying to watch a movie on an international flight, and even the lowest brightness setting still kind of seared my eyes with how bright it was. I wish there was the ability to set it even lower. Now, these critiques are minor though, because the inward displays on the Apple Vision Pro are by far the best in class. They really make me wish that the Quest 3 had substantially higher resolution displays, because in my experience, the Apple Vision Pro has ruined watching content on other lower quality AR and VR displays at this point. Now, while the displays are both best in class and incredibly impressive, one feature that still stands out about the Apple Vision Pro, but still has a decent amount to go, is the pass-through experience. Now, the main culprit for users feeling motion sick while wearing AR-based glasses is the latency between the camera feed and then the projection on the display. And the Apple Vision Pro's latency is supposedly 3 to 4 times faster than its competitors, which I think substantially prevents the queasy feeling that a lot of AR adopters have felt for years. Now, unless lighting is optimal, and even when it is, the pass-through image quality is just not that convincing. It's definitely better than a lot of other VR headsets or AR headsets, but it still needs some work. The object occlusion, like when your hands are positioned in front of you and blurring out virtual objects or occluding virtual objects, also seems to stand out. There is some kind of graininess around the edges of your arms and hands, but it's still a pretty good experience and feels better to me than the Quest. But when the headset actually detects other objects in the area, there's some sort of a partial occlusion that does take place. And so windows that are kind of placed in other items in your physical area become like slightly transparent. So for example, I have a monitor right here. If I put a screen virtually through the monitor, it would partially occlude the application such that the application becomes kind of translucent. There's a reason for this, and it's specifically to prevent you from running into objects that happen to be sticking out around you, but it doesn't seem to work very well. And in my experience, when I was sitting on that international flight, what I really wanted to do was move the movie back further away from me so it was more comfortable to view. But because there was a seat right in front of me, I could not do so without the movie becoming translucent. So I actually had to shift it closer to me as though it was a screen in front of me, which really missed on my watch experience. But let's dial up the immersion and enter the virtual world. Despite not being called a VR headset, the immersive mode of the Apple Vision Pro is meant to achieve the general same goal as pure VR. Being able to teleport to a completely virtual world that you can interact with is the foundation of what Oculus and HTC created nearly a decade ago. But even at the time, VR nerds were debating so hotly about 6 degrees of freedom and the impact of 6 degrees of freedom. For those who aren't familiar, 6 degrees of freedom means that you both have the ability to visually look around your environment, but also move around your environment. It's what differentiated the HTC Vive from, for example, the Google Cardboard. This was a massive development in VR headsets, but why does this have anything to do with the Apple Vision Pro? Obviously, being released in 2024 means the Apple Vision Pro has complete 6 degrees of freedom interactions with the world around you, right? Apple's premier VR experience, which is the immersed kind of home screens that you see on all the advertising, those are very, very high resolution and very, very impressive in terms of just how high fidelity they are. But they might as well be 3 degrees of freedom, because as soon as you move from one place to another, the entire space just disappears. There's no exploration around that space. And while there are slowly becoming more and more VR experiences for the Apple Vision Pro, mostly from third-party developers, those are few and far between, and the majority of applications in the Apple Vision Pro are either purely AR applications or iPad applications, or they are very much 3 degrees of freedom where you stay in one place and then you just kind of look around. It doesn't have the same sort of magic that I experienced with the HTC Vive so many years ago. Those environments that Apple offers off the shelf do feel substantially more polished than the Quest equivalent like home screens though. And speaking of polished, eye tracking on the Apple Vision Pro is quite refined, especially for a first generation product. My first experience with eye tracking on the Apple Vision Pro felt like magic. And while I felt generally the same way about the first hand tracking experience on the Quest, I do think this is like a whole nother level. Technically, the Quest Pro also has eye tracking, but it's not a fundamental feature of the operating system the same way it is fundamental to the Apple Vision Pro. As soon as the hand interaction became kind of refined with the Quest Pro and then the Quest 3, I basically would leave my controllers around anywhere because I didn't really need them for most normal interactions that I was doing. Typically, I would just open up a web browser, or I'd use a VR desktop environment for working on my computer. I wasn't frequently playing games because I'm not much of a VR game player as much as a lot of folks. And so in my mind, the Apple Vision Pro coming without controllers was not the biggest downside in my experience. I appreciate the value that controllers drive to the experience of VR if you're specifically playing games. But as far as my typical interactions with a VR system, I don't feel like it's sorely missing. The eye tracking, on the other hand, doesn't feel like it's 100% fully baked. On the Quest, you have the ability to specifically interact with things by pointing at them, effectively pointing at them using your hands, which feels very, very natural. On the Apple Vision Pro, you don't have that flexibility. Whatever you do with your hands is kind of largely ignored, save for the very, very few set of interactions of selecting something or dragging something. For the most part, your eye interactions is what drive how you navigate the Apple Vision Pro, with some exceptions being actually getting to the home screen that we mentioned beforehand. When you are in the situation of, I have an iPad app basically a few feet from my face and all of the elements are large enough such that it's very easy to look at an element, pinch my fingers together and know exactly what I'm selecting, for the most part, the experience is pretty good. It slows down your experience a little bit when you are kind of in a flow and all you want to do is, okay, I see an item, I'm going to click there. I see an item, I'm going to click there, because as soon as your eyes move before your hands can click, that means that you're going to click the wrong item. But more frustrating to me was in smaller elements environments such as Safari web browser. When you're browsing the web, elements on screen are really not made for this very, very broad view. And so your eye tracking often becomes not precise enough to be able to interact with something, and often it gets slightly offset. So if you can imagine trying to look at an element on a screen. So for example, you're trying to play or pause music in Spotify, and you're specifically staring at the play button, and you try and squeeze it, but unfortunately your eye tracking is just slightly offset, so that then you skip the track because it's right next to it. That interaction gets very, very frustrating. And so your only solution is to go through the eye tracking setup process and hope that it solves the offset issue, or to force yourself to look just slightly to the left at the rewind or the last track button and then press it in anticipation of the eye tracking actually thinking you're looking at the play button. If this sounds confusing or frustrating, that's because it very much is. Another interesting user experience decision is the way that Vision OS allows users to organize applications. Or I guess the way Vision OS doesn't allow users to organize applications at all. The journey of home screen customization that iOS and even iPadOS have taken from their inception, like original iPhone, you couldn't move anything. You're now back to that. Like, we're back to the Stone Age, because basically all of the apps on the home screen are completely static, and you can't so much as create your own folders. As you install more apps, it will be added onto the next page, unless they are iPad apps where they live into a small little compatible apps folder, which is just so bizarre, and it feels like a very, very obvious miss. Next, when organizing your currently open apps in your virtual space, apps not in focus become opaque and their volume just automatically lowers. Now, logically, this makes sense. It's like, okay, well, this app is falling into the background, and so it shouldn't be in focus. It should become opaque. But imagine not being able to hear your anime lo-fi girl music in the background while studying because the application is not in focus, right? Obviously, when you're watching TV and studying at the same time, you'll have the TV offset and you still want it to be visible. But In order to make it fully opaque again, you need to look back in its direction and squeeze your fingers together in order to watch it. And then you have to look back at whatever application you're actually focused on and click it again in order to switch focus back, instead of the applications just being all in focus. Maybe the biggest thing holding the Vision Pro back, though, is, besides the price, the lack of app support. Now, not all iPad apps are compatible, which we all just thought, oh, all iPad apps is going to make this experience so great. But even those that are technically compatible don't really scale quite often. Generally, web apps, by the way, will scale better. So often the web apps will be a better solution depending on the kind of framing and design that you want the app to fall into. But worst of all, to me, is the absence of like dedicated applications like YouTube or Hulu or Spotify, which are some of the most popular apps across app stores and some of the apps that I use most frequently. While it made perfect sense for Netflix to not design an Apple Vision Pro app, and a lot of people were very angry about that, it's kind of crazy to think that Hulu also didn't make an Apple Vision Pro app, despite being owned by Disney, who had this exclusive contract with Apple Vision Pro on launch. I think there's a number of different reasons why a lot of apps are not available yet. Obviously, this is a pretty niche product. While Apple might have sold a lot in terms of a $3,500 unit, it's really not quite the volumes that we'd anticipate from every single phone sale, for example. And so in order to kind of motivate a developer to develop an app, they need to specifically say that this is a Halo project of sorts. It's, even if it doesn't generate a massive amount of users, it will drive a lot of interest in this app that people are developing, which is why a lot of the applications that you're seeing developed for the Apple Vision Pro are from, I'll call them no-name developers that don't really have a substantial footprint in the App Store as it stands and are trying to kind of make their name in the Apple Vision Pro application. The bottom line is the Apple Vision Pro, in my mind, many folks saw as the savior of VR and AR. It was clearly a substantially different product than anything that we've ever seen. And I think a lot of people hoped that this would kind of bring everyone into this new VR space. I think in my experience, it's not quite happening at the pace that at least I had hoped for. The Apple Vision Pro, in my mind, is the best VR or AR headset that I've ever experienced by far, but that's to be expected considering just how much more expensive it is than other VR headsets on the market. It still has, as you've seen throughout this video, a lot of things that need to be fixed. Now, most of those things are fixable, but a lot of those things are driven by Apple's continued decisions to be different. And I don't necessarily think they should be making those constant decisions, at least to appease me as someone who purchased a $4,000 headset. But I'm curious to know what you think. For those who have owned or tested the Apple Vision Pro, what do you think of the choice to use such premium hardware at such a massive expense? And what do you think about the user experience? I'd love to hear down in the comments. Now, there will be future videos on our review of the Apple Vision Pro. There's a lot of different perspectives I've brought in specifically from being a Windows user that I'd like to talk about in a full video. So be sure to get subscribed if you're interested in that. Thank you for watching InnoIso. I hope you like this coverage of the Apple Vision Pro. Be sure to catch our next coverage coming up soon and all of the other videos that are on our channel, which I think you'll find interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.